All right, hello everyone. How are we doing? Uh, it's been it's been a while since we've seen each other, and it's going to be a little bit longer since we see each other again. I want to talk today about our unit tests. They are done and they are marked. Uh, so let's just get into it, shall we? So for the first question, where you had to select two fundamental beliefs and explain how each is reflected in Canadian society. I'm not going to go too much into kind of how you should have answered the questions, more just what the information is. So remember, fundamental freedoms. Those are your things like your freedom of expression, your freedom of beliefs, your free speech. Those are all the basic rights and freedoms that we as Canadians have. Your democratic rights, those are all about voting. So once you turn 18 and you're a Canadian citizen, then you're allowed to vote in Canada. No one can stop you. Mobility rights. This is key. Some of you said that mobility rights allow you to come to Canada. That's not the case unless you are Canadian. What mobility rights are is if you are Canadian or if you are in Canada already as like a permanent resident, then you can live wherever you choose. You're allowed to move from Ontario to Quebec. You're allowed to move from Quebec to Yukon. You can live wherever you choose. And as a Canadian in Canada, you can leave and return. Your legal rights. This one, some of you didn't really, I don't think, studied it a whole lot. The legal rights, it is about the fact that you can't be arrested without reason. And you also have to know what that reason is. And the really important part is that it's called habeas corpus. You are considered innocent until you are proven guilty as the person is charged. So let's say someone accuses me of murder. Let's say I murdered Amir. Sorry, Amir. Didn't mean to murder you, but let's say I did. I don't have to prove that I'm innocent. They have to prove that I did it, and it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So I am innocent until I am proven to be guilty. Equality rights. This is where everybody in Canada is equal underneath the law, and they can't be discriminated against for race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, anything along that lines. Your official languages of Canada, there are two. We have English, and then we have French. And the important thing about official languages of Canada is that you are allowed to speak to the federal government in either of the official languages. So if you're in British Columbia, you can speak to the federal government in French or in English, whichever one. And then the last fundamental belief is minority language rights. So if you are in a province that is predominantly English, so for example, Ontario, we are a mainly English-speaking province, French is protected. If you are in Quebec, where it is a predominantly French-speaking province, English is protected. And then New Brunswick is the funny one because they're both legal there. So then we have our responsibilities. I'm not going to go over the individual responsibilities and which category they fall into. I'm going to give you some broad understandings of them. Your federal responsibilities is anything on a national scale, something that in British Columbia, it's the exact same in Newfoundland. So our money, that's a prime example of something that is the same wherever you go in Canada. Immigration. Immigrants come into Canada. They have to come into Canadian borders. National defense. Our armed services have to protect all of Canada. Something like public transportation, that's individual. That's not going to be the same across the entire country. Your provincial is anything that is just within the province. So for example, healthcare. Ontario's healthcare is different from Quebec's, which is different from Yukon, which is different from Alberta. Education in Ontario is different from Alberta, which is different from Saskatchewan, etc. So your province is really anything that is local but needs to be standardized around. And then your municipal, when it's too local to be the responsibility of the province. So for example, snow clearing. The people in Thunder Bay don't care about snow clearing in Ottawa. For example, zoning. Do the people in Windsor care if a church is going to be built across the street? Or if a shopping mall is going to be built in the West End? No. It's things that are very, very localized. Okay, so federal, whole country. Anything that says national, automatically federal level. Provincial, anything that is large enough that should be standardized, but is still too small for the whole country. And then your municipal, anything that is very, very specific to that area. Then we have this chart. Not going to go over it right now. Those are all really specifics. You just need to know that those positions are there. But I'll fill that out and I'll put that on our classroom together. Roles and responsibilities of the 3 branches of government. So our 3 branches are executive, legislative, and judicial. Okay, those are our 3. We don't have any more. We don't have any less. Our legislative branch, what they do is they make and pass the laws. And the legislative branch, that is Parliament, so both the House of Commons and the Senate, as well as the Governor General or the Queen. At the provincial level, they don't have a Senate, they just have their House, and then their Lieutenant General. So legislative branch, they make and pass the laws. The executive branch enforces the law. So that is where you have your Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the Queen. They will enforce the law. They say this needs to be enacted. Arguably, the police would be part of the executive branch because they enforce the law on a day-to-day scale. And the executive branch in Canada is found in the legislative branch. So Justin Trudeau is Prime Minister. He is part of the executive branch, but he's also a member of Parliament. So he's technically part of the legislative branch. Whereas someone like Pierre Poilievre, he is not a member of cabinet, he's not a member of the government, so he's only in the legislative branch, not the executive. And then finally, you have the judicial branch. These are the judges. Their role and responsibility is to, after legislation has been passed, they read it, they review it, and they decide if it's constitutional or not. Their purpose is to protect Canadians, average Canadians, from government overreach. And they have to make sure that if, let's say the federal government decides to pass a law that forces all Canadians to join the armed services when they turn 18, does that fit with our freedom of expression? Does that fit with our freedom of religion? And if it doesn't, then the judicial branch cuts it out. So they are the check on the power of the other 2 branches. They have to make sure that the laws are comfortable and constitutional. So legislative makes the laws and passes them. Executive enforces the laws. And judicial, they review the laws and make sure that they're actually sound. What is Canada's form of government? Well, we are a representative democracy because we choose people to represent us and make decisions for us. Plain and simple. We are technically a constitutional monarchy because we have our queen as the head of state and we have a constitution that limits her power, but we are primarily a representative democracy. Okay? And those answers were actually quite strong. I was very, very impressed with those. And then finally, rights, freedoms, and responsibilities. A lot of you confuse your freedoms and your rights. So your freedoms, anything that you're allowed to do. I have the freedom right now to walk down the hallway. That is a freedom. I have the freedom to wear a hoodie. That is my freedom of expression. And when you look at our Constitution, when you look at the Charter, when it says freedom, that's usually a freedom. If you have the freedom of expression, it means you are free to express things however you choose. If you have the freedom of religion, it means you can practice whatever religion you want. If you have the right to gather with people with like-minded ideas and form things like a union, that is a protection that the government is extending. They're giving us that protection. It's not something that is a freedom, it's not something we are born with, but it is something that is given and protected by the government. So that's the big difference between freedom and a right. A freedom is something that you should have naturally. A right is something that the government has chosen to give us and protect. And then finally, you have a responsibility. Some of you were great with this, others you kind of confused it a bit. A responsibility is not like taking out the garbage. Your responsibility is a responsibility to your country and your fellow person. And right now with the COVID-19, it's a really good example of that. We have a duty, a responsibility as Canadians to self-isolate in order to make sure our country is better. Afterwards, when we have the next election, we have a responsibility to go and vote and choose who should be our representatives. Their responsibilities are bigger than just the responsibility to do the dishes, the responsibilities to do your homework. They are your responsibilities to the country as a whole. So rights are things that are protected by the government. They've chosen them explicitly and said, this will be protected. Your freedoms are things that you're essentially born with. The freedoms are the things you're allowed to do or be naturally. And then your responsibilities are what are you responsible for the country as a whole. Okay, so hopefully this video helps you just to refresh your memory, and I hope everybody is doing well, and we will talk soon. Have a great one.